psychology for daily life. And were any of you here, you know, I talked about evolutionary psychology. Could we turn it up a little? People? Thank you. Can you hear me? Oh, there it is. Thank you, thank you. Terrific. That's quite the crowd. And I was saying, you know, I spoke in the spring on evolutionary psychology. Were any of you here for that talk? Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, yeah. And gee, it generated quite a discussion. I couldn't even get halfway through the talk. It was just everybody was so interested in this and these new perspectives, new research in evolutionary psychology that's really transforming how we think about ourselves and why we are the way we are. And that one, that talk that I gave is coming out in a publication in the new journal called Mind. It's out of a UK publisher. And there's copies of it here if you want to pick it up. But I'm really excited about working with this publisher. Their editors rewrote my whole paper. They really helped us so much. And then look at this beautiful illustration that they did. So this will be coming out online. And this is a new magazine journal type. It's like supposed to compete with Scientific America. But it'll be online, and there'll be lots of blogs going about it. And even when it's published, we expect it to be published any day now. There'll be, you know, blogs and discussion groups that are going on. So I'm really excited about these developments. And so today I'm adding to the evolutionary psychology the poster project. You know, thinking about this evolutionary psychology of really explaining why we are the way we are, and if you can use it in your daily life. So again, last year, you know, the title was Why We Are the Way We Are. And then in December 3rd, I'm talking on 4 models in evolutionary psychology to, you know, continue on the subject. Okay. Yeah. There it is. Okay. So really the inspiration for all of this work, it really comes from, you know, the Harvard professor Richard Wrangham. The Goodness Paradox is really the best book ever written in evolutionary psychology. And also, he's got quite a few YouTubes out now. This one last year in particular. If you get a chance, you know, in a half an hour, you can really get all of his ideas and really catch up with it all. So here's the poster for the poster project. And so I've divided it up into 3 parts. And I'll start with the top section, the middle, and then the end. And so here are our 4 hominid species that we're related to. And in the middle there. And in the top left corner, you see the 23 identified hominids that we take from that these 4 were in our, you know, evolutionary line. And, you know, it's set up now, it's become so standardized in the last 30 years that you can, you know, really talk about it and think about it because, you know, the names are easy to name. And, of course, on the left, we have the chimpanzee and our common ancestor from 7 million years ago. And Wrangham is particularly interested in this because we can get some insight into ourselves from the chimpanzee. So in particular, he's arguing, and provides quite a bit of evidence, that our common ancestor probably was very much like the chimpanzee is today, because they continued to live in the tropical forest. They haven't moved out of the tropical forest. So in particular, he's interested in, he just published last year, that the chimpanzee, today's living chimpanzee, is approximately 750 times more aggressive than we are. And he compared He got that information from comparing in the wild the chimpanzees, fighting and hitting each other every day versus, our human societies where we're just sitting here. We're, we basically do very little, in our family life of fighting. And so that's a really big number, 750. So a big part of his understanding of our psychological evolution is how and what caused this real decrease in our aggressive tendencies. Then Lucy, you're familiar with. I mean, at the Field Museum, you go down there and they got the wonderful exhibit of the primate. And Johansson from the University of Chicago, this is his book on Lucy. And it's a very good representative of early hominids because it has both the first, both upright walking and the opposable thumb. So it represents maybe 15 or 20 of those species, early species, because it has all of those early developments. And then we get to the Homo species. You're familiar with Homo habilis at 2.3 million, erectus starting 1.9. And so Homo sapiens, us, our first fossil records are at 0.3 million years ago. And and then you can kind of just sort of the rest of the talk is about really this last 0.3 million years of our evolution, which is associated with the evolution of our psychological abilities. And it's in the hunter-gatherer societies before the end of the last ice age. And in particularly, where they're highly egalitarian. But, like this cave art that was done before the end of the last ice age. And Picasso, when he came out from seeing, said, this is the best art that's ever been done. So it really is phenomenal that this first culture with language was able to do really the best art. I mean, almost all modern art and everything can be seen in this artwork. I mean, it's spectacular. And so then, the scientific field now is galvanized around what were the evolutionary process, the natural selection processes that caused our psychology here before the end of the last ice age. So that's kind of outlined here in this middle section of the poster. And then on the left is the red is our chimpanzee relative and our common ancestor from 7 million years ago, with the idea that they're approximately 750 times more aggressive than we are. And what happened for our natural selection to reduce our aggressiveness to this low level that we have today? It's a big part of his book. So looking at B there, late Pleistocene, so, during the millions of years ago. So we're really at 0.3 million years ago, where's the first identified fossils of us, Homo sapiens. So that's, the start of us. And it goes from 300,000 years to 12,000 years ago at the end of the Ice Age, is this period when our psychology evolved. So it evolved in hunter-gatherer bands, and it's the first culture with language. That's okay. So, of course, this is so long ago. I mean, so long before Rome and everything else. There's really never been any, any evidence other than a few fossils and artifacts. So it's always been the big question in science, really, widely regarded as the toughest problem in science. But then they recently found 6 current hunter-gatherer bands that have been living in isolation since the last ice age. And that they found that they're making the exact same artifacts and that they represent the societies before the end of the last ice age. So it's really, anthropology now is all focused on, describing these 6 communities. And then they have another 20 that have had some influences and so forth, but they're all kind of fitting together to get kind of a unified explanation. And so this is what they found, that all of these hunter-gatherer bands were organized around highly egalitarian values. So, this is the first culture. There are migratory bands. There's no accumulation of wealth. There's no farming yet. And that it's universal that these societies are organized around highly egalitarian. There's no schools, there's no government or anything. They manage themselves. And the management is primarily through these highly egalitarian values. Then, you see the next mark there, egalitarian, enforced by. They observed in these 6 bands that 3 negative social processes of gossip, ostracism, and in some cases, executions, uses the term coalitional proactive aggression, that really enforced the egalitarian values, highly egalitarian. Then those targeted, the next highlight there, those targeted for the 3 negative processes had shorter lives and fewer offspring. And you're familiar with evolutionary processes. This is the, kind of the best evidence for natural selection. If you have, based on character traits, individuals are living longer or shorter and have fewer or more offspring. That's a measure of very strong natural selection pressures for traits. So this produced, again, very strong natural selections for decreased reactive aggression. How do we get this 750 times decrease? He said it's really through these 3 negative social processes, is the argument in his book. And things like conscience, why we worry so much and things like that, are really well explained by this, that if you're living in a society where everybody realizes that you're subject to gossip, ostracism, and possibly execution, that it's going to be very strong natural selection processes for our conscience abilities to be, worried about these things. And so, this is really the best explanation of why we worry so much, why we go to bed at night, we start thinking about things, we can't go to sleep. It's because of the strong natural selection for conscience traits in what they call it the late Pleistocene, this 300,000 to 12,000 years ago. And other psychological. And so there was another big factor that they had related to natural selection, which was reputation, high status, reduced the effects of being targeted by these 3 negative social processes. And so, it's kind of the 3 negative social processes along with status, really makes for a very complex society. And, it's the interesting thing, they concluded that the status was so interesting here. For example, they're making stone tools and things like that, and they're making the huts. So it's those that made very good stone tools or made good huts or were good hunters that had high status, and so that they were less likely to be targeted. Now, for those high status, you can see like they did storytelling. So those that could do good storytelling had high status and were less likely to be targeted. So this is natural selection for our intellectual abilities, as well as many of our emotional aspects. If you think about being able to be, control your emotions and so forth, you need it in this environment of 3 negative social processes. You need to be able to control your emotions. And that's why they were selected for, and that's why we have our, kind of reserved emotional feelings. So with that in mind, so this is the current explanation as, described in Wrangham's book for the evolution of our psychological traits of our intelligence. So intelligence evolved through this status and being able to, talk and avoid the effects of the 3 negative social processes. And likewise, emotionality and our personality, that kind of make up our, main psychological traits. Their consciousness, I meant to say there in the bottom, instead of consciousness, I meant to say conscience. Our conscience ability, why, we're thinking, our worrying, and things like that. And then, kind of advanced psychological traits like theory of mind. You're familiar with that. I'm thinking about what you'll think if I say this or you do that. Like, for example, no other animal on Earth is able to get above level 1 in theory of mind. And they struggle with fear. Or we go to level 5 in the sense that we're, thinking about what others will think of us if we say this to them, and that, go back and forth. That's the idea behind theory of mind. And aesthetics, here at the bottom right figure there, that beautiful artwork from southern France before the end of the last ice age. So they've evolved the full aesthetic abilities. I mean, there's no way they could have done this artwork if they didn't have the full aesthetic abilities that we have. And so those artists that did this had high status in the community. So those with very high aesthetic abilities, had more offspring, lived longer, and that's why our aesthetic abilities evolved during this period. So then the pictures at the bottom. So these are hunter-gatherers, hunters on the left, gathering in the middle there, and then the huts, and then the cooking, and then this artwork there at the right. And then to finish up the last part of the poster, so the idea is what I'm trying to add today is, how you can use this perspective in your daily life. So really, you can kind of understand yourself better. Why you worry so much. We all worry. For living a fuller life, if you understand that this is the origin of our psychological abilities, it's very helpful for, kind of adjusting and realizing that, all people on Earth, science looks at the mean plus or minus 2 standard deviations is 96% of all people on Earth, and everybody in this room will be within that mean and 2 standard deviations that, really evolved in this late Pleistocene period before the end of the last ice age. And so we want to avoid adverse conditions of depression and anxiety. And so this is kind of an educational background for you to, be thinking about how you can avoid these problems. And then, so to promote, we might call these 3 things 3 virtues. Promote these 3 virtues. Consider practices that are standard psychological practices today. Meditation, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, journaling, diet, exercise, social analysis, or working with a therapist. They all can be very helpful for really avoiding these adverse effects of psychological problems, and also for living a fuller life. And so, I'm going to open up for discussion in just a minute here, and just say, here we have copies. So I've written a draft of the publication on the poster project, and so you can pick up a draft of the paper, and it's under consideration at the journal. But they asked if I could include a couple of people that it would take the poster, use it at home, and tell me about their experiences with it. If I could get 2 or 3 people to say, I looked at this poster, I found it, or I found it helpful, or I didn't find it helpful, or just kind of this whole psychological perspective. And, I think it would really add a lot to the paper. I think it would be the first publication ever on how evolutionary psychology is being used to help people in their daily life. So there's posters here. And then there's framed posters here if anybody wants to take it home. And my email is on there. And if you could email me with your experiences, and we could include them in the publication. Of course, I wouldn't include your name or anything like that. So I'm here today to recruit you for this study of a few people. So with that idea in mind, and my email is there for everything. And so here's the poster project, and we'll start the discussion here. And yeah.
So, sure. So maybe you could say a little bit about the assumption that we live in an egalitarian society. Seems there's, a lot of complaint is about patriarchy and hierarchy, and how has that negated some of the pro-social stuff that you're talking about?
Right. You know what? I'm afraid I missed that. I had that in my talk, and that's so important. If I could go back here. Yeah. Here, the green one. I left out the green. So of course, there are alternatives explanation of our evolutionary psychology. And, of course, there's more recent times. So in particular here, after the end of the last ice age, of course, we start the agrarian period. Now, the agrarian period is farming. Farming needed all of these work to do the farm. They needed the slaves to do the farm. And this is the origin of egalitarian values and that were needed to support farming during the agrarian age. Now, we live in the modern age after 1850 with fossil fuels that we're able to do, so much more, like with tractors. You need very few people on the farms now. The tractors do it all. And so the egalitarian values in our modern society are much less strong than they were during the, like during Rome and up until 1850. So that's kind of that background. And if I might just mention too, of course, Wrangham goes through all of the other arguments for the evolution of our psychology, and said, really, all of the other ones are highly speculative because they did not have the evidence from these 6 hunter-gatherer societies. Really, if you think about, trying to get evidence for our psychology, the only way you can get it is from these 6 tribes that they found that have lived in isolation since the last ice age. So, intelligence. There's an argument, you follow the stone tools, it shows greater intelligence over time. There's lots of weaknesses, and so that there was a natural selection for intelligence for stone development. But, that's, really total speculation. There could be lots of reasons for improved intelligence, and he's arguing, these were the selection pressures that were going on for our intelligence here, and not the stone. For example, they would improve the stones and then they'd stop and go back to an earlier one. And there was nothing like unified and long-term about stone development would say that improved stone development was the origin of our intelligence. Likewise, why we are so emotional that we can kind of sit here with each other where, the chimpanzees, they can't even be close to each other. They fight. But we feel very comfortable, sitting here with each other. And so other explanations are that, of course, for the activities in the late Pleistocene, they needed to be more cooperative, and that's why they evolved that way. But he said, of course, when they designed these studies, and they were looking for that, and there was no evidence for it, that it really was these 3 negative social pressures that were causing the strong natural selection pressures. And they found no other strong natural selection pressures in these 6 hunter-gatherer bands. Did I answer your question? Thanks for bringing that up.
I wonder about the ratio of chimpanzee violence to human violence. Do chimpanzees have wars like we're seeing in Israel and Ukraine and over time?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And so there's both personal violence and there is war in the chimpanzee. The No-Go Society, you know, there's a beautiful now in BBC now showing the warfare between the two different chimpanzee groups in Africa, the no-go area. And they end up, you know, so it's sort of this idea of the evolution of the large primates. You know, it occurred in Africa because they had the big fruiting trees. For example, no large primates occurred in South America because they don't have the large fruiting trees that were needed to get the energy for the big brains. And chimpanzees spend all their time looking for these large fruiting trees. They'll eat a few leaves if they can't find them. But so there's competition for these trees, the fruiting trees, and usually that's the dividing line between the different troops of chimpanzees, and they fight over that. And really, the BBC, you know, there were the two tribes of chimpanzees, and they killed all the ones in the other tribe. And you know, it was that kind of planned aggression that the chimpanzees have without language. They'll get together and they'll, you know, skirt around the outskirts where these trees are, looking for the other tribes. And if they find them, they'll kill them. And then, no, this was just published this last year. Wrangham published where he compared chimpanzee aggression to humans, human cultures, and he took human cultures that were kind of known for their aggression, and came up with this number of approximately 750 times more aggressive than we are. Yeah.
Hi. I would like to ask about, can you hear me okay? I would like to ask about the dawn of the internet age and how you might think that our psychology has possibly failed to keep up with current technological advances.
With technological advances. Now, you know, that's a big question, right? I mean, it's kind of the history of, you really have, in my opinion, it's very helpful to think about these hunter-gatherers before the Ice Age, then the agrarian period, and then our modern age. Really, those are the three periods of history for human history. And, you know, in the, before the last Ice Age, it's subsistence living. Basically, the only energy that's used is really what they eat. Of course, with farming, that energy level goes up by about a factor of 6 to 10 because, you know, with farming, they're getting more food and so forth. Then in the modern age, you know, this social development's going up by factors of hundreds, if not thousands. And I think that's the overriding importance in thinking about society, is this social development that occurred. And with that in mind, I don't see a lot of changes coming out of like the internet and things like that. It's really this large social development and the hierarchical values that are kind of driving things and, you know, making predictions for the future. I didn't answer your question very well. Go ahead, we can discuss it some more. I probably didn't answer it very well.
I was referring specifically to how, the internet has progressed rapidly over the past 20 or 30 years, that we are seeing a lot of changes in general global mental health, and perhaps that we're not adapting to this new technology very well.
Well, right. So it's an important point because really, I mean, Wrangham is arguing that our psychology, our emotional makeup, our intellectual makeup really evolved in these hunter-gatherer cultures before the end of the last Ice Age. And they're extremely highly egalitarian, and we do not live in an egalitarian. this extreme egalitarian where you have such strong effects of gossip, ostracism, and in some cases executions. And so a large part of mental health problems you can think of as a disconnect between the evolution of our psychology in the late Pleistocene versus this modern society, which includes the internet, a big part of the internet, and our interconnectedness. Really, to kind of really think through that, it's kind of like a whole hour presentation. I don't think I want to expand on it right now.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, a lot of hands here, and you want to pass the microphone around?
So I'm fascinated by hunter-gatherer societies, and that's part of why I came today, so thank you so much for presenting on this. And I'm curious, and I haven't read the book, so I wonder if they address this in the book, or just I'm sorry, I'll try to talk slower.
Oh, thank
I
you,
talk
please.
way too fast, I'm sorry.
I think you'll turn up the volume there, too.
Okay, I'll
Yeah,
get closer.
That's really good.
Thank you, Justin. I'm curious about the 6 societies that were approached for this study.
Yes.
And is it possible that while we have become less egalitarian in the agricultural world, that
Yes.
these societies have become more egalitarian over the past several thousand years? Because they're not frozen in ice, right? So I was wondering whether there were any thoughts on that.
Thanks so much for that question, because really the arguments that I'm giving here are all of the recent research that was done in these 6 societies. Plus, they said there's another 20 that they've looked at that have had some influence from modern, agriculture. And the 20 are all fitting into it. I mean, you can figure out the exceptions based on that. And that, so what's the quality? You're kind of asking a quality research. How can we be sure about these 6 societies? Oh, and I think I did make the point that they found in these 6 societies, these 6 bands, so they weren't living in tribes. Really, tribes come with the agricultural period, like you think of Indian tribes. No, it's not that at all. That's very hierarchical. This is bands, migratory bands, subsistence living, and that. But in particular, they found they were making the same artifacts that the cultures at the end of the last ice age were making. So that is kind of taken as conclusive evidence that these 6 bands living today are highly representative of the bands living before the end of the last ice age. Now, whether they don't think they've changed much since then. Really, they think they've been pretty much the same. It really hasn't been a long time. It's only 12,000 years. I mean, really, this late Pleistocene, we're talking about 300,000 years. And, it's 800,000, from, anyway, yeah. Did that answer your question?
It did. Is that because I know very little about evolutionary psychology, is that one of the underlying connections that researchers make, that technology and cultural, I'm not sure I'm using the right word, like technology and cultural operations, are those very connected for hominids generally, or?
So you have to, it's hard to conceive of what a hunter-gatherer band would be like to exist in a highly egalitarian. They say all of the people that have worked, they're just amazed at the nature of this highly egalitarian society. They say it's hard to stay out of trouble with it. It's hard not to be targeted for gossip, ostracism, and potentially worse. So there really is no technology. There's no wealth development as we know it, and so that's the culture in which these strong natural selection pressures occurred, with the idea since then, the last 12,000 years in agriculture and modern, we do not have strong natural selection pressures occurring anymore because we don't have egalitarian societies.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yes. Thanks for those questions. Just pass the mic around.
going to say to the person who's asking about the internet and technology that gossip.
It's supposed to be on.
Closer. Obviously, I don't
There
do
it
this for a
goes.
living. I don't do this on TV. So I was gonna say to the gentleman who was talking about the technology and the internet and its relationship to this, that gossip and ostracism in our technological age has not gone away, and it's on steroids right now on the internet. So it's changed, but you could say, it's still there. It's just changed its form. And something that I was thinking about before that comment was, when you're talking about the 6 small tribes and the egalitarian that evolved in the 6 small tribes, if you have a small tribe and everybody has to contribute and toe the line for survival, the goal being the survival of the tribe, we're a very large tribe here. And I wonder how you can port that model of society in that small tribe that is striving for survival to our very large tribe and group of tribes that exist here, that don't have to strive quite so hard for survival, but we still have our problems.
Right, and I think you're discussing and kind of this comparison to what happened after the end of the last ice age. Was the start of the agrarian society and the accumulation of wealth, and then really you think of all society was developed around supporting the farming society. So we have hierarchy of values, we have cities, we get institutions, we get religions that support hierarchy. And so it's hard to compare these hunter-gatherer bands that are migratory subsistence living to, the agrarian in our modern societies. That's kind of to begin with. And I might say that, we're all familiar with gossip, ostracism, and in some cases executions. But it's not like the pervasive, overriding thing that's going on in our society that's organizing it and working on character traits in one way such that natural selection can occur. For example, we still have executions, but people get executed for lots of different reasons. So the net overall effect, there probably isn't really any natural selection effect on executions in modern societies. For example, kings, they execute people for that they don't like, and things like that. That it's not the direct natural selection process of affecting character traits through decreased survival and decreased numbers of offspring.
What is the, how do I do this? Okay. What is the evidence that the Pleistocene band had language, and how did that develop?
Yes, so the idea, it's generally agreed in psychology today, it's kind of standard thinking, that language, our language abilities, really evolved in this late period from 300,000 years ago to 12,000 years ago. And so, at 50,000 years ago was the kind of the flowering, the springing of all of the beautiful artifacts, and even this, the cave art that I was showing there was, in the last 50,000 years. And so it's generally agreed then that like to do that cave art and all of the complex social processes that were going on, but language was complete language as good as we have it today was occurring. And then look, it really hasn't been that long since the end of the last ice age, 12,000 years ago, they say our language abilities really haven't changed since the end of the last ice age.
I just wonder if we maybe missed the sort of the key at the beginning of the conversation, but tell me if I'm wrong. That I understand that the idea is we have to the degree which our psychology is hardwired. It is the hardwiring is designed to thrive in the Pleistocene era.
Exactly.
And the since we don't find ourselves there, we face some difficulties, and those is the idea of the poster. Is the poster designed to help us face those difficulties in our individual lives? Is that the person?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
And so and the main part of that is simply to gain the awareness of this, situating ourselves in this context of evolution of our species.
Yes, to, understand why we are the way we are. That's the Greeks, that was their thing. They said, that's what we need to know to live a full life. And it's along that argument, too. If you really understand this is why our psychology is the way it is, it helps you to live a more full life and to avoid, I was just reading now, the psychological problems are the #1 medical problem in the world today. It's more than combined heart cancer, and generally, so, I might just add, I've been working with 2 clinical psychologists on this, really spending a lot of time discussing it with it. And it's going to be very hard to get this perspective into clinical psychology. They're all interested. Everybody's interested in this. But, they say, well, like when a patient comes in, of course, they have to address their immediate concerns. We all agree with that. But then an educational program will follow that at some point. And I'm promoting that this evolutionary psychology really should be a part of any clinical psychology program today. And it is not, and it's highly unlikely that it ever will be. There's so much resistance to this. And I'm really pushing this, and you see my, so the publication, the first one is Why We Are the Way We Are, and then my second publication that's coming out in this new journal is 4 Models in Evolutionary Psychology. This poster project will be the 3rd one, and my 4th paper that I've got a draft of is the evolution of our language abilities. That really, you can't think about our language abilities without thinking about the late Pleistocene. Yeah.
So would you say that the approach is designed to help us as individuals cope with living in a world that isn't egalitarian, as opposed to suggesting we might do well to make our world more egalitarian for our improved for psychological benefits to us all?
Okay, thanks for that question. And just generally this idea of why, it's helpful for people to understand why we are the way they are. In psychology today, you cannot find a book that mentions any of this. But I think they should. I think it'll be the big transformation in psychology. So, that's generally that. Then, the second part of your question about a lot of our conflicts and our psychological problems come out of living in a modern society. Yes, I agree with that 100%. It's a very, very different than these egalitarian societies where our psychology evolved.
So, I would like to ask, why is there so much resistance to this idea, especially since the science of psychology is so relatively new compared to other disciplines?
Well, that's a good question for science. You've heard of the, each scientist, each anthropologist has their own bailiwick. And, they're promoting their own perspectives. And, Wrangham's book was published 4 years ago, and I don't see very many other publications coming out supporting it. So that's kind of been a motivation for me to kind of get these publications out, to kind of promote this perspective. I think it's a much better perspective than anybody else is presenting. Yeah, I mean, it does take time, and and there's certainly discussions going on about these 6 communities, and more research is going on. You really have to, if you're going to look at something like how execution in these cultures really affected our character traits, and Wrangham is very interested in that. He said there's approximately 1 execution occurring in every 1.5 years. He said at that high rate of execution, you could pretty much account for all of our 750 times decrease in aggressive tendencies compared to the chimpanzee.
Thank you.
And yeah, I hope you'll take some posters for the poster project, and my email's there. If I can just get 2 or 3 people to, really think about it and say, whether they liked it or didn't like it. I'm sure the paper will get published, but so it would be a big help for me. And also, I highly recommend, in a half an hour, you can get a much better description and explanation of everything I've said today in Wrangham's YouTubes. You just go to Google and put in Richard Wrangham, Harvard professor, and his YouTubes come right up, and he explains it much better than I do. And it looks like that finishes up, unless you have one more question here.
Yeah, it's interesting that you put this in the perspective of the hunter-gatherers. Hello?
Yes.
Yes. Some would argue that we really have moved from a hierarchy into a more egalitarian society. But it's just that certain people don't like that and want to return to hierarchy, and that creates a lot of structure. But it seems to me that we have this egalitarian hunter band still within us, and I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah.
And that we, we've gone through a long period of hierarchy, and now that doesn't really suit us. And this is a way of touching back to what it means to be human and distinguishes us from chimpanzees, and tapping into that's already there. It never went away. And I thank you for bringing that connection out.
Oh, thanks. That really summarizes this. And think about democracy. Really, democracy did not flourish in the agrarian society. Rome, it wasn't really a democracy. Like today, democracy is really flourishing, and it has to do with our psychological abilities that evolved in late Pleistocene, plus social development that have really fostered. And that's why we predict for the future that democracy will continue to flourish in the future. We predict that extreme poverty will continue to decrease. That's one of them, and our best achievements of all times is extreme poverty and things like that. But it's not just associated with our psychology, but it is associated with a society that's so highly developed with so much energy, that's able to have the institutions that support society. Yes.
Jim, if I can ask maybe the last question.
Okay.
I guess what I've been mulling here is this idea of the anxiety caused by, if I'm always second guessing if I'm going to be ostracized or somebody
Exactly.
gossiping
Yes,
about
yes,
me,
yes.
and kind of here, since Mandy's been here, we've talked a lot about beloved community. Where's any kind of pro-social aspects of love and connection in those societies that could have been the glue that accounted for their,
Right.
positive pro-social behaviors,
Yeah, thanks for that question. And Yeah, I really need to talk about that a little bit. So it's very interesting, these anthropologists, when they go to these sick societies, they're always amazed about how happy these people are. He said singing breaks out during the day, periodically, all the time. That he said they're the most talkative people they've ever encountered. They're talking all the time. He said they wear them out with all their talking. So it's these communities, 6 communities, are very, positive, pro-social, if you will. And I did, say that, represent that before. That's another aspect of it. But they're also very aware of the 3 negative social processes, and that, and so they are functioning, they are talking, trying to avoid being targeted by these 3 negative social processes. Oh, thank you very much. Boy, this was quite the discussion. I look forward to seeing you on December 3rd. This paper we just got conditionally approved for publication on the 4 models in evolutionary psychology goes through this and a discussion of history that, mostly we've been talking about today. So I hope we can continue the discussion then. Oh, thank you so much.